The story here comes from the Minnesota Reformer, so there's some slant in it, be that as it may. A bill making it a misdemeanor to knowingly spread false information with the intent to impede or prevent people from voting is likely to face a legal challenge if it were to become law. Now, the provision is part of a larger elections bill. I'm not sure where it resides right now, but in the article, it has this one line here, and then I'll hand it over to you. It says, dirty tactics like telling people to vote on the wrong day have long been employed to suppress voting, usually in black neighborhoods. They're getting in all the buzzwords there. That particular, I laughed at that because the telling people to vote on the wrong day, I mean, that's always used as a joke online. Almost every single election cycle, somebody makes a joke like that. But it sounds like how vague this particular provision might be, that could potentially be a misdemeanor under this bill?
Yeah, that's essentially what the lawmakers are saying. And, I think back to last election cycle where Kim Crockett had made just a mistake, basically, and just said the wrong day, I think, for the election day coming up. And people, of course, pilloried her in the news media and said how terrible this was and everything, but obviously it was a mistake. The real problem here is that the person who gets to decide whether or not that was an honest mistake or whether it was intentional is the Attorney General of Minnesota, or as the bill says, anyone else harmed by that speech somehow. So anyone who could claim that they were somehow prevented from voting because of something that someone said. And when you put that kind of power into the hands of the Attorney General, you're really roping in a lot of totally inoffensive speech, truthful or intended to be truthful speech, into potential criminal penalties. And the bigger one, John, that I think is really frustrating to see is this statement of in the bill. It specifically says, includes an example of that you can't make a false statement, at least what someone else claims to be false, about the qualifications for or restrictions on voter eligibility at an election. So the legislature just passed the felon voting bill that allows those who have not completed felony sentences to vote in elections once they get out of jail. But the Minnesota Constitution, I believe, doesn't allow that. And so then what do you say then? So if someone, 60 days before an election, someone says, hey, the Minnesota Constitution says you can't vote if you're a felon and you haven't been restored to all your civil rights. And someone on supervised release hears that and they say, oh, man, I guess I can't vote. Well, Representative Greenman, the author of this bill, actually used that as an example of the kind of speech that could be punished under this. So you're looking at, for making a good faith statement, if the Attorney General or someone else thinks, oh, actually, I think you lied and I think you intentionally did it, we're going to sue you. We're going to force you to hire a lawyer. Why don't you get your $20,000 retainer ready? And then if we win, we're going to assess attorney fees against you for making a statement about election law. And how ridiculous is that?
Yeah, punishable by up to a year in jail and a $3,000 fine. Now, the bill also enacts automatic voter registration. That would allow 16 to 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, protect voters, election officials, and volunteers from intimidation and harassment. So I have another question as it relates to that, but let me back up for just a moment. Sure. In terms of the challenge to the spreading false information, how likely do you think that you could win just on that basis alone in challenging of this provision in the bill?
I think it's there's a high likelihood of success. And I know that, Secretary Simon has said, for example, that there's a intent factor in there and that should limit the damage, so to speak, to the First Amendment done here. I was part of the team at Mormon, Cardinal, and Erickson back in 2013, 2014 that litigated the 281 Care Committee versus Arneson case to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, where we won. And in that case, that was a challenge to Minnesota Statute 211B.06. That statute said that it was a crime and that you could be sued by somebody else if you made what they considered to be a false statement about the effect of a ballot question. The Eighth Circuit, in that oral argument, it was hilarious to listen to. The Eighth Circuit, one of the judges said, well, this is why we rebelled from England, trying to not have these kinds of penalties. I kid you not. And so that's the kind of, foe that the author and those who are passing this bill and those who are enforcing this this law, if it becomes law, are going to have to deal with. I think it's a very high chance that we will win that lawsuit.
Now, what is what sort of argument can you put forward as it relates to the automatic voter registration? 16 to 17-year-olds pre-registering. What kind of, what can you mount against that?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really considered that provision too much, John. But I will say that generally speaking, the big problem that you could see coming out of that is people registered to vote who are not eligible to vote yet. And the question really arises in my mind as to what safeguards there are to prevent those who are less than 18 years old from voting. And it's the same thing that goes for, I think Representative Emmer has written a letter to the legislature about those who are not legally in this country getting driver's licenses, and whether that also has with it the opportunity to then register to vote on the driver's license application. And really the question comes down to what safeguards are there, because the Minnesota Constitution, Article 7, makes it clear as to who can vote, and you got to think that there's a way to uphold that against any provisions that allow people who are not eligible to vote to actually vote.
So this is where my tinfoil hat comes on, and thank you for asking that, because I feel like, and again, this is just a feeling, but I feel like they know that the misdemeanor for spreading false information aspect of it is going to be challenged, but they know that there's going to be less of a challenge on the automatic voter registration, which a lot of people, myself included, are concerned about. So I feel like those other more egregious items are added to these provisions, like to invite the controversy, knowing, well, that may get struck down, but at the same time, the other one won't, and it kind of validates their other argument. And again, I'm getting tinfoil hat here, James Dickey, but that's where my head goes on stuff like this.
Well, I understand the thought behind it, because it's like, why would you throw everything at all the kitchen sink into the mix here? But I think every single provision they put forward has to stand on its own 2 feet. Another provision, just to give you a quick one, if you watch some of the testimony in committees where Representative Harry Nitzka absolutely rips apart what essentially looks like an end around to the Citizens United case from back in 2010, basically trying to get, political contributions banned from corporations if they have a certain number of foreign investors in their corporations, regardless of if they actually have control of the corporation. I mean, that kind of stuff is written throughout these bills. I mean, it is all throughout them. And so you're right. I mean, there's a whole lot there. And there's a lot of quote unquote soft targets if you're a lawyer in this field. But the reality is that everything will rise and fall on its own merits. And I know that we are looking at everything in all these bills that come through. We read bills all the time to see whether there is, something that is a problem under state or federal law. And, we're going to keep challenging it. We're going to keep fighting against this kind of really unconstitutional behavior.
James Dickey from the Upper Midwest Law Center, thank you for the time. As always, sir, great talking with you. And where does this go from here? I know this is the Democracy for the People Act, HF3 and SF3. Where does it stand right now, and what happens next?
Well, I think that this is going to become part of an omnibus bill. I think it might have already been re-engrossed in an omnibus, but I'm not 100% certain on that. It might come to a floor vote in the House very soon, maybe this week or next. So keep your eye out for it. I'm sure it'll be contentious as usual in this legislature. Yeah, and we'll continue to reach out to you and get further updates on this as well. And again, thanks for coming on the show this morning. Thanks, John. Always great to be with you. Appreciate your time. Enjoy the weather. I hope you get out golfing.